Daniel Ricciardo is one of the hottest topics in the Formula One world right now, and his reconnection with Red Bull has sparked controversy all over the grid. However, there are many fans that are questioning whether Red Bull should change what's paradoxically working for them and then put Ricciardo in Perez's seat, with the Aussie saying that this would be the fairy tale ending of his career. So just because it works in our eyes, is it a good idea for Red Bull to bring back Ricciardo for that second seat? In order for us to understand this question, we need to look deeper into Perez's performance, especially the one in the last three races, something that reiterated the talks of Ricciardo being part of Red Bull yet again. Last year, and this season as well, there seems to be a repeating pattern of Perez winning a couple of races, being a handful of points behind Verstappen, claiming that he can fight for the championship, and then just losing the competitiveness and being much slower than not just Verstappen, but Ferrari and Mercedes as well on some occasions. This year, in the last three races, Perez hasn't managed to get into Q3, having had a catastrophic ending to his Q1 session in Monaco, and not even making the podium in the upcoming two races in Barcelona and Montreal after exiting in the Q2 session. If he had the upgrades to the RB18 to blame last year, ones that made the car more distant to him, this year it's all about his confidence and his ability to drive the car the way Verstappen does, to the absolute fullest. This is one spectre of Perez driving that needs changing immediately. Otherwise, he'd see himself being bought out of his contract and replaced for 2024. Whether we like it or not, Red Bull is not a team that is known for being patient with underperforming drivers. And considering what they did with much higher potential drivers than Perez, such as Albon and Gasly, it shouldn't be that hard to get rid of the 33-year-old, as Helmut Marko went on to say. His initial goal was 2 or 3 years. That would be more than he planned anyway, and you just have to keep your options for succession open. There we have it. Perez's seat in 2024 is officially under threat. And up until this statement of Marko, both he and Horner said that Perez is not a danger in terms of his future at Red Bull, and he needs to focus on what the team needs the most out of him. Bring the Constructors' Championship back home and finish second in the Drivers' Championship. But given the fact that Verstappen is dominating the grid in such a manner, winning qualifying sessions with over a second advantage and races with over 20 seconds ahead of the second driver, is this really what Red Bull should be satisfied with Perez? As a top team, you never want to have a driver who's underperforming as severely as Perez did in the last three races. It's obvious that this is just a slump. And considering how experienced Perez is, he could bounce back literally next race with a win or a podium, and therefore confirm that he's still not done with his championship hopes, ones that seem a bit stale at the moment. But Red Bull is now officially testing Daniel Ricciardo after the Silverstone GP in July for a 3-day Pirelli tyre test, as Helmut Marko went on to confirm. We have Ricciardo in the car for 3 days at Silverstone during the tyre test, and then you can evaluate where Ricciardo really stands. What needs to be addressed right now is that whoever gets this seat will be the second driver in Red Bull, and the fact is that Ricciardo is in a much better position in his career to accept this role than Perez. But this may be the main root of all the issues. If Ricciardo accepts right from the start that he's just there to complement Verstappen and not fight for race wins and a potential championship, then he's agreed to mediocrity right from the start. Even Bottas showed some teeth at the beginning of every campaign, only to get beaten by Hamilton in a dominating manner. Even though Perez did not perform the way everybody expected him to in the last three races, he still enjoys a 9-point lead over Alonso for second place in the Drivers' Championship, and Red Bull have sweet pain on their hands, fixing a driver that is now not threatening Verstappen for the championship, but is rather trying to get back in his own groove. Still, even though there are all smiles on the podium, the tension between these two is very high, and that's something that Red Bull might not want to deal with and place Ricciardo just to avoid the unnecessary drama between both of their drivers. But at this point, is Ricciardo really ready to perform at the highest level? He's had 2 very bad seasons with McLaren and is currently in his paid year off, so delivering the results that the team will ask from him might be a bit challenging for the Honey Badger. He does have the experience and he'll definitely have the right machinery in his hands, but if you look at how other drivers stayed in shape throughout the current season, I couldn't help but wonder, is Ricciardo's prime over? Even if it's not, would it be smart for Red Bull to jeopardize the entire academy that they've built from ground zero and have drivers like Liam Lawson, Yuki Tsunoda, Ayumu Iwasa and Dennis Hauger go to other teams and become champions with Red Bull's rivals? After all, Ricciardo's time at Red Bull has already been spent, and he made his decision back in 2018 to join Renault for 2 seasons, as he believed that he'd be more competitive in their car and not with the Honda of Red Bull. No matter how badly Perez is performing right now, he's doing what a second driver needs to do in Red Bull, not challenging Verstappen, although this feat is something that the Mexican driver would desperately want to change in the upcoming races. However, the slump in his performance could snowball into him effectively ruining Red Bull's strategy on many other fronts, as we've seen that teams like Aston Martin and Mercedes have already started to pick up the pace, with Mercedes confident that they can fight for wins after their latest upgrade scheduled for Silverstone. This means that whenever Verstappen suffers from a medical issue or retires from a race, the team can't rely on their second driver because he'd be so far behind the grid, and all of this could have a negative effect on both of their championships. This might be one of the reasons why Red Bull would want to try out Ricciardo in their alternative way, meaning that if he proves to be worthy of an RB19 seat after the tests in Silverstone, he'd take away De Vries' seat in AlphaTauri and prepare for the 2024 Red Bull seat as well. Now, motivation also plays a huge factor. Perez was highly motivated when he was 6 points behind Verstappen, but after the Miami GP, one that saw him finish second and be beaten by his teammate, who started 9th and took the lead very early in the race, the slump happened and the Mexican driver just wasn't able to find his groove. It's evident that if he can't fight for wins and championships, the desire to drive just isn't there. And although he said that the championship fight is not over yet, and Austria is the next race in which he should bounce back, we all know how these things end with Perez. On the other hand, you have Ricciardo, who's now going through a patch in which he's rediscovering himself and finding that passion for an F1 seat yet again. That wasn't something we could witness with McLaren, as Norris' performance and the disappointing car that the Woking-based team provided him with ultimately led to a situation in which he didn't want to be in the sport anymore. But similar to Hülkenberg, he's now more than ready to show what he has left in his arsenal, whether that's being right behind Verstappen and completing the team's ultimate goal, or driving for their sister company and climbing to the RB19s the harder way. Many F1 experts think that after talking to Ricciardo, they got the feeling that he's hungry for an F1 seat, and that's something that the Aussie has said himself: "I have unfinished business in F1." The question is whether the risk is worth taking from the side of Red Bull. You have a driver who's won 5 races and is entering his 3rd season with the team, claiming that he can fight for the championship, but only going to embarrass you further and not even making the Q3. And you have a driver who's ready to show you that he has what it takes to be the perfect wingman for Verstappen. And on top of that, you have an array of young drivers in the academy, all desperately waiting to prove that they are the next Verstappen. So the choice of Red Bull is very difficult, but one thing is sure: whatever they choose, it will have consequences for their near and far future, given the fact there are many intangibles in this scenario.